Hi guys, how are you all? I'm pretty sure it must be so amazing and please take care of yourself. Fever, sore throat, अगर cold वगैरह कुछ symptom है, panic नहीं होना है. Take care of yourself, right? So breathing and exchange of gases, part one, part two, part three are already done, and those students who have not watched it, I have given the link of those videos in the description box of this video. You can check out and watch those videos. Plus, those students who are having any doubt, they can connect on the Telegram channel. I have given the link in the description box itself of this video. Today, we are going to discuss transport of CO2, regulation of respiration, and disorders in detail way, right? So, obviously, we have done transport of oxygen. Now, we would start with the transport of CO2. And remember that obviously CO2 is formed in tissue, and how it is formed we have done in the previous class, right? So CO2 actually formed in tissue which need to be transported via blood to the lungs. So hoga kya that CO2 would be loaded in blood and go to the lungs, and in lungs blood unloaded CO2 and give it to the lungs. So we would see how the loading of CO2 happen in the blood and how unloading of CO2 happen in the lungs region, right? So tissues may how loading happen and lungs may how unloading happen from the blood. We would see these two processes here in the transport of CO2. So 53 ml CO2 present in 100 ml deoxygenated blood. So this is the amount, and this 53 ml in 100 ml of deoxygenated blood transported in three forms. So one form is 70% CO2 actually transported in bicarbonate ion form. How this bicarbonate ion formed, we would see later in the diagram, right? So 70% CO2 कैसे transport होता है? In form of bicarbonate ion, as simple as that. 23% CO2 transported in binding with hemoglobin, and we know hemoglobin is proteinaceous in nature. Hemoglobin, if proteinaceous in nature, having amino acid, so CO2 actually form bond with the amino acid of hemoglobin to form carboamino hemoglobin, right? And third, 7% CO2 is transported in form of in dissolved form with plasma, right? So we would see that how they are transported from tissue to the blood in these three forms, and how these three forms transported to tissue via blood. So I have told you that we are having tissues. So these are tissues, right? These are tissues. And we know that obviously we are having the blood plasma. This is the blood capillaries. This is the blood capillary wall. This is the blood plasma, and this is the RBC. I'm drawing RBC huge because most of the reaction happen here, most of the transport happen, most of the things happen here, right? So this is obviously RBC. This is the RBC. I have told you that obviously cellular reaction happen in tissues, that is glucose oxidized in presence of oxygen and convert into breakdown into CO2, water and ATP energy. This reaction happened in tissue, and obviously CO2 produced here and oxygen utilized. So we know at the tissue region, hemoglobin actually release oxygen. Hemoglobin oxygen bond is broken. How? We have done it in previous class, and oxygen released here and go to the tissue for this reaction. It would go to the tissue for this reaction. It is happening inside the tissue. ये रिएक्शन कहाँ चल रहा है? टिश्यूज के अंदर चल रहा है ना? एंड दिस CO2 actually need to loaded in the blood. From tissue to the blood it need to go. So CO2 from the tissue which is present in the tissue would go here in the blood. So this is the blood plasma and this is RBC. I have told you 7% CO2 actually dissolve in blood plasma, and this 23% CO2 bind with the hemoglobin. It would bind with hemoglobin and obviously transported in this form, carbamino hemoglobin form. And maximum percentage of CO2, that is 70% of CO2, is actually transported by binding, reacting with water in presence of enzyme known as carbonic anhydrase. What enzyme? Carbonic anhydrase enzyme. Carbonic anhydrase enzyme. Can also write it like this, right? So this is the enzyme which would do this reaction, perform this reaction and form bicarbonate. It would form this. And this bicarbonate actually dissociate into bicarbonate ion, and obviously hydrogen ion. So this would dissociate into bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ion, right? अब क्या होगा in chemicals का? We would see it. You know what, this bicarbonate ion actually when produced in large amount, जब बहुत ज़्यादा amount में HCO3 negative बन गया in the RBC, it would actually diffuse out. What would happen, bacha? It would diffuse out of RBC in the blood plasma. कहाँ आ गया? Blood plasma में. So bicarbonate ion actually diffuse out in blood plasma, and to balance the ion, negative ion, same amount of chloride ion actually enter the RBC to maintain the ionic balance, right? So what would happen, same amount of chloride ion actually go inside, same amount of chloride ion go inside RBC to balance the ionic, to maintain the ionic balance, right? And this is known as the chloride shift. इसको बोलते हैं chloride shift, or also known as, this chloride shift also known as hamburger phenomena. Burger, है ना? So it is known as hamburger phenomena. And why this hamburger phenomena? Why this chloride shift happening? Just to maintain balance of bicarbonate ion. Means this ion, right? So negative ion going out, so same amount of chloride ion need to come in order to maintain ionic balance. So this chloride shift and hamburger phenomena is movement of chloride ion in RBCs in exchange of bicarbonate ion to maintain the ionic balance. This is happening. And what would happen with this hydrogen ion? This hydrogen ion actually bind with the hemoglobin. This hydrogen ion bind with the hemoglobin and obviously produce hemoglobinic acid. किसके साथ bind करेगा? Hydrogen ion bind with the hemoglobin and form the hemoglobinic acid. And because of this hemoglobinic acid, obviously oxygen will break down from hemoglobin and go to the tissue. So obviously hemoglobin and oxygen bond would break down and oxygen go to tissue. So oxygen tissue में जाएगा, tissue से CO2 blood में आएगा, CO2 coming from tissue to blood and oxygen going to the tissue. This is happening here. And obviously tissue and blood में exchange हो रहा है, known as Bohr's effect. We have done it yesterday if you remember. So exchange between the tissue and blood. Exchange between tissue and blood is known as Bohr's effect. From tissue, CO2 going to blood, and from blood, oxygen coming to the tissue. This is happening here, near the tissue. Now the blood would go to the alveoli in these forms. अब ऐसे ही ये कहाँ जाएगा? It would go to the lungs, go to the alveoli. Now it has reached alveoli, and alveoli में क्या होगा? Same. This is the RBC. This is RBC. This is alveoli. And obviously blood plasma, right? This is blood plasma. We know that obviously in alveoli oxygen is more, partial pressure of oxygen more, and CO2 is less in comparison to blood. Now this exchange happening between alveoli. अब जब blood आ चुका है कहाँ तक? Alveoli. Blood is transported till alveoli in the lungs. Now we would see how CO2 unloaded from blood to the alveoli. How CO2 go from lungs to alveoli and oxygen come to the blood obviously. So oxygen would diffuse here in the RBC and CO2 actually go out of the RBC, out of blood. We know 7% CO2 actually dissolve in plasma. It would go to the alveoli. 23% we know bind with the hemoglobin. It would also break down into this, and obviously this CO2 also go to alveoli. And hemoglobin is free to bind with oxygen. So it would bind with the oxygen, form oxyhemoglobin. It would form oxyhemoglobin. Now, what would happen? Hemoglobin, which bind with hydrogen ion. What would happen? Obviously, oxygen coming from alveoli consistently in the RBC. And this oxygen would bind with the hemoglobin. This would bind with the hemoglobin and form oxyhemoglobin, and hydrogen ion is actually dissociated. Hydrogen ion को निकाल दिया. Now hydrogen ion is free from all the hemoglobin, and when hydrogen ion increased so much in RBC, what would happen? Blood plasma में जो bicarbonate ion है, bicarbonate ion in plasma would come inside. Why? Because hydrogen ion increased so much, and bacha oxygen actually so much oxygen bind with the hemoglobin, and obviously hydrogen ion is dissociated, and more the hydrogen ion means acidic condition developed in the RBC, and because of that bicarbonate ion diffuse in the RBC from the blood plasma. ये पूरा blood plasma है, right? Around the RBC plasma is there. So now hydrogen, this bicarbonate ion come inside and obviously react with the hydrogen ion. क्या बनाएगा? वही H2CO3 in and H2CO3 again dissociate into water and CO2. Now CO2 would go to the lungs. So in this way ये पूरी reaction उल्टी हो रही है, right? And obviously किसके presence में? Carbonic anhydrase enzyme की presence में this reaction again going opposite. And because of the shift inside the because of the movement of hydrogen ion, this bicarbonate ion inside the RBC, chloride ion to maintain the balance go to the plasma, and this is known as reverse chloride shift. क्यों हो रहा है? Just to maintain ionic balance both side. Reverse chloride shift. So this is actually the exchange between lungs and the blood. Oxygen coming from lung to the blood, and blood से CO2 going to the alveoli. So this is the exchange between the lung and the blood, right? So oxygen coming out, and obviously oxygen would go in. So oxygen from the lungs going inside, binding with the hemoglobin. Obviously CO2 would be broken down from the hemoglobin. CO2 is released going to the lung. Hydrogen ion also dissociated from the hemoglobin, and oxygen is bind with the hemoglobin obviously now, right? Because of increase in hydrogen ion, bicarbonate ion comes inside from blood plasma, and obviously chloride ion go outside to maintain the body balance, means to maintain the ionic balance, and hence all the CO2 would go out, right? तो यहाँ पर ये H2CO3 बना रहे हैं, and finally H2O plus CO2 would be released. CO2 go to the lungs. That I have told you here. So bacha, same way, under normal condition 4 ml, only 4 ml, because 53 ml CO2 were present in the 100 ml deoxygenated blood. So out of those 53 ml, 4 ml CO2 is delivered to alveoli from the 100 ml deoxygenated blood, that you have to remember. So that's all. This is the transport of CO2. In case you find any doubt, please send your doubt to me, right? So now we would see regulation of respiration. How the respiration is regulated by our brain, by our chemical regulation. So it is regulated in two ways. One by brain, and second by some chemical receptor are in our body. So obviously it is also regulate our breathing rate, respiration rate. So neural regulation actually done by these three regions. So breathing are usually involuntarily. Involuntary means not in our control. But to certain extent we can control our breath, right? We have very limited control on it. And that limited voluntary control actually done by cerebrum of the brain. So this voluntary control of the lungs actually done by cerebrum. Rest all the part of the breathing, most of the breathing, usually breathing is involuntary, not in our control, right? Inspiration lasts for 2 seconds, and expiration happen for 3 seconds. Infant means small kids have more breathing rate. Small kids have more breathing rate than the adult. And adult have 12 times per minute breathing rate. We know it. 12 to 14 times our breathing rate per minute. But infants have very high breathing rate, right? And yes, we would see that regulation of respiration done by two ways. Nervous means brain. Chemical means we would see how the chemical regulation also done in our body for the respiration, right? So first is the nervous regulation, and obviously two respiratory center present in the body just to control respiration. So पहला है respiratory rhythm center, and this respiratory rhythm center actually present in the medulla oblongata of hind brain. तो बच्चा ये कहाँ प्रेजेंट है रेस्पिरेटरी रिदम सेंटर? इट इज प्रेजेंट इन द मेड्यूला रीजन ऑफ द हाइंड ब्रेन एंड विच कंसिस्ट टू ग्रुप ऑफ द न्यूरॉन. So medulla region have two group of neuron, ventral group of neuron and dorsal group of neuron, right? So this is present in medulla part. ये पूरा medulla part है. And obviously this medulla oblongata have this ventral part, ventral group of neuron, which actually control forceful breathing. While we are forcefully inhaling, forcefully exhaling, पूरे जी जान से inhale exhale कर रहे, it would be controlled by ventral group of neuron of किसका? Medulla. So medulla have this respiratory rhythm center. Dorsal group actually active during normal breathing. So means medulla send signal to our muscle of ribs, muscle of diaphragm for contraction, for inspiration, right? So contraction जब ये करते we have done, it would cause inspiration. So muscle of the ribs and diaphragm get contract and it would cause the inspiration for 2 seconds. After 2 seconds, this impulses from the medulla oblongata get stopped. कोई impulse नहीं आएगा. Nerve impulses from medulla oblongata stop to the ribs and diaphragm. They got relaxed now. And because of the relaxation of muscle of diaphragm and ribs, they would relax for another 3 seconds. And obviously जब ये relax हो जाते हैं, I have told you in the mechanism part, obviously because of their relaxation, chambers, दो जो pulmonary chamber है, thoracic chamber obviously volume decreases, pressure increases and expiration happen that time. So it would happen for 3 seconds. So this is how normal breathing actually controlled by dorsal group of neuron of medulla. Second nervous regulation center present in the pons region. So obviously pons region have pneumatexic area, and this pneumatexic area moderate the function of medulla. It moderate the function of medulla region, right? And obviously it would reduce inspiration or shut down inspiration. So suppose हम लोग बहुत ज़्यादा inspire कर गए हो, but obviously we would stop inspiration for after some time, no? So reduce of inspiration and shut off inspiration is done by pneumatexic center. NEET question, you have to remember it. During exercise, pneumatexic area cause shallow and fast breathing. Why? By decreasing inspiration rate. जो हम एक्सरसाइज कर रहे हैं, we require fast breathing and shallow breathing that time. So it would reduce, it would be controlled by pneumatexic area by decreasing inspiration time, by reducing inspiration duration. And hence, during exercise, incomplete filling of lungs happen, which you have to remember. Right? So this is beautifully our pons region control our breathing rate. So pneumatexic center decrease inspiration and apneustic center of pons increase our respiration. So these are obviously two center of pons, and it would help in moderate the function of medulla. You have to remember these certain points for NEET exam, right? Chemical regulation. So you know what? हमारी बॉडी में, inside our body we are having chemosensitive area which are sensitive for chemicals. And what are those chemical? CO2, hydrogen ion, NEET question. So chemosensitive region of our body sensitive for these two chemicals, not oxygen, CO2 hydrogen ion के लिए वो sensitive है. So obviously CO2 concentration, hydrogen concentration actually trigger the chemosensitive area. So what are chemosensitive area? Where are these chemosensitive area present? First in aorta. Aorta is the artery, largest artery of the body that supply blood to all body parts. So obviously here aortic body is present. And carotid artery have carotid body. So carotid artery actually supply blood, this artery supply blood to brain part, and obviously this artery have the carotid body. So this is the second chemosensitive area, right? So we are having two chemosensitive area, aortic body, which is present in aorta, largest artery, and carotid body actually present in the carotid artery which supply blood to the brain. So that means arterial blood में अगर CO2 बढ़ेगा, if there is the increase in CO2 hydrogen ion in arterial blood, then obviously it would send signal to the respiratory rhythm center of medulla and our rate of respiration increase. Agar PCO2, partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion are high where? High in these artery, in aorta or carotid artery, in the blood of aorta or blood of carotid artery, they are having these chemosensitive area which send signal to respiratory rhythm center of medulla. And क्या होगा? It would increase our respiration rate to remove CO2 or decrease hydrogen ion as soon as possible. Right? So अगर CO2 हमारे arterial blood में बढ़ गया, if arterial blood have more CO2, it would increase our rate and depth of respiration. And when there is decrease in CO2 in our arterial blood, NEET question, arterial blood में, right? So if decrease CO2 in our arterial blood, so what would happen? Obviously in that case, it would decrease the rate of respiration. Decrease the rate and depth of respiration, as simple as that. Right? So that is all about the regulation. I'm pretty sure it's clear to everyone. Now I would tell you disorders. Let's start the disorders. First disorder is allergic disease, allergic reaction, allergic disorder known as asthma or asthma, whatever you say. So asthma is allergic reaction where allergens actually act as foreign agent cause allergy in our respiratory tract. So what would happen? This is the normal bronchial tube and this is asthmatic bronchial tube where huge mucus deposition happen, swelling in the bronchioles happen, which would decrease the passage of air, which would decrease the air passage of bronchi, right? So obviously because of allergen can be any foreign agent that would cause allergy in our respiration, in our respiratory tract. How? By increasing mucus and by decreasing the surface area of bronchial tube, by decreasing the air passage. And those people who are having asthma produce wheezing sound, सीटी बजने जैसी आवाज आती है during their breathing, wheezing sound during breathing. They are facing very difficulty in breathing due to inflammation, swelling and redness of bronchioles and bronchi. They would having the spasm, sudden voluntary contraction need statement. Spasm means sudden involuntary, involuntary contraction of bronchial muscle. It would just change the diameter. Involuntarily spasm would happen. Involuntary contraction, relaxation happen in bronchiole. And to prevent it, we just take antihistamine medicine, antihistamine inhalers, right? So that it would prevent the allergic reaction. Antihistamine actually decrease the allergy, and histamine of the body, bacha, histamine actually released by mast cell. You know mast cell? Mast cell of connective tissue secrete histamine, and this histamine actually responsible for the allergic reaction. But here we would take the inhaler which is having antihistamine, and it would be like a histamine. You cannot secrete mast cell, you cannot secrete histamine. So hence allergic reaction would be prevented, right? So this is actually, it is prevented. Second, emphysema. Emphysema is basically seen in those people who are chain smoker. है ना? So what happened in this case, this is the normal alveoli, lots of the normal alveoli. Gradually, their wall gets degenerated in those people who are chain smoker. So what happened? Their exchange surface, their gaseous exchange surface, their exchange gaseous exchanging surface area get decreases, and it remain filled with air because it is not participating in exchange of gases properly. So it would remain full of air, it would remain inflated, it would remain filled with air even after exhalation. एक्सलेशन के बाद भी बहुत सारी हवा भरी रहती है. Lots of the air intact remain in the alveoli because their wall is damaged and they are not efficiently able to exchange the gases. And this is the chronic disorder in chain smokers, right? It is seen in chain smokers. याद रखना किसमें? Normal इंसान में नहीं. Those who are chain smokers, basically in those people this disease is seen, where the alveolar wall gets degenerated, and it convert into large sac-like structure which decrease the surface area for gaseous exchange. Even the loss of elasticity of the wall of alveoli, bronchioles, alveolar sac, they decrease the elasticity capacity, and obviously lungs remain inflated, exhalation become very difficult, and this is the emphysema. Next disease is carbon monoxide poisoning. So it is seen when, suppose in the winter some people actually burning these wood, and it would create so much smoke in the room and there is no ventilation in room and they sleep with the coal burning on. So they would keep on inhaling that air and there would be huge suffocation because their body actually, carbon monoxide is increased in their body. It would bind with the hemoglobin, form carboxyhemoglobin, and this carboxyhemoglobin is so stable bond, means not easy to break. So it is stable and hemoglobin would not bind with the oxygen now. Why? Because carbon monoxide have 230 times more attraction for the hemoglobin. So bacha, yes, carbon monoxide have 122 times more affinity, means attraction for hemoglobin, than oxygen. So oxygen won't bind with the hemoglobin, and because of carbon monoxide, because of carboxyhemoglobin, obviously hemoglobin not able to bind with oxygen, not transported oxygen to the body, it would cause headache, dizziness, nausea, and even death also. So carbon monoxide combined with hemoglobin, so you have to remember at the same time as, so just leave this point, right? So obviously you have to remember here that carbon monoxide bind with the hemoglobin, right? With this much, so they have so affinity for the hemoglobin, and oxygen won't be able to bind with the hemoglobin. Now no oxygen available to body suffocate, and even death happen that case, in that case. Second is the SARS. SARS is the severe acute respiratory syndrome. It's a viral respiratory disease. So obviously patient of SARS 2003 in China में सबसे पहले मिला था, और ये जो है कोरोना वायरस का एक म्यूटेंट फॉर्म है. सो ऑब्वियसली कोरोना वायरस म्यूटेंट फॉर्म ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंजा वायरस. सो ये एक फॉर्म है कोरोना वायरस की विच इज द म्यूटेंट फॉर्म ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंजा वायरस. तो 2003 में मिला था इसका पहला केस. And obviously that coronavirus, which is very famous now, it was actually existing in China in 2003 by the name SARS, right? It was causing the SARS disease. Cyanosis is actually the condition when our body not able to get the sufficient oxygen. So in that case, skin color, mucous membrane color become bluish due to deficiency of oxygen in blood because our lungs are not properly working. So this is known as a cyanosis condition. है ना? Next is the occupational lung disorder, also known as pneumoconiosis, means inhalation of the mineral dust. Like silicosis means inhalation of silica, asbestosis means inhalation of asbestos in the cement industry, in the labors of the cement workers of cement industry, workers of the dust industry, right? Obviously, who are working here. So they would be having these diseases. And continuous exposure to harmful gases, flames, dust, environment would cause this occupational pneumoconiosis, which is causing serious lung damage, proliferation of fibrous tissue increase in the lungs, inflammation, swelling, and redness of the lungs would happen. Even the upper portion of the lungs, actually fibers deposited there, it become hard, right? So this is the very severe, serious lung damage actually, right? So that's all, bacha. These are certain important disorders which is given in our NCRT, and obviously you have to remember it also. Another condition is mountain sickness. So what is the mountain sickness? I'm pretty sure all of you who have visited mountain from the plain areas must have faced this mountain sickness. Means they are feeling dizziness, they are feeling like suffocated, they are feeling like to vomit, nausea, ऐसी symptoms उनको दिखने लग जाते हैं, right? So mountain sickness होता क्यों है? Just because we are basically moving from plain area to the hilly area, बहुत हाइट पर चले गए. So obviously our body have hilly area have less partial pressure of oxygen. So means there are having hypoxic condition. Hypoxia condition is there, means less partial pressure of oxygen in hilly area. And when we are going to the hilly area, obviously because of low partial pressure, we are inhaling oxygen which is not sufficient to fulfill the demand of the body. So what would happen then? Obviously, after 6 months, and we would face all the mountain sickness, mountain sickness का जो वो होता है, mountain sickness symptoms, right? Like we would feel dizziness, we would feel this what we called nausea, vomiting, है ना? So dizziness is the symptom of mountain sickness. We would feel nausea, we would feel high pulse rate, we would feel high heart rate, right? So nausea, vomiting. So these are the symptom mountain sickness hai. So what happened now? Obviously, when you are living there in for 6 months, so your body actually get adapted for it. Suppose you are living for months, for 6 months, for 3 months. So your body get adapted to that environment, get acclimatized to that environment, and your hemoglobin increase in number, right? So that it would bind with the oxygen that is available in the environment, right? Like at least unse bind kar sake. And plus your rate of respiration also increases. So obviously this is the way our body adapt itself for after some time for the mountains, for the hilly areas, right? So that's all, bacha, which is important for our respiration. And I'm pretty sure you liked the video, right? So write down in the comment box, and thanks a lot for your love, for your support, and we would just start the new chapter. So I'm pretty sure you like the whole 4 parts, and those students who have not watched it, I have just shared the link there. And stay home, stay safe, be happy, and see you all, right? So bye bye, bacha. Have a great day.